Hey everyone. So for quick reference, this slide is what happens when you tell me that my first slide is too boring.
And you know, giving her a 5-pound bag of gummy bears didn't hurt.
All right, so risk of light aversion aside, thank you all for coming to our talk. I've been told that this title is a little bit ridiculous, but I thought given after a Wednesday night in Vegas and you guys attending an 11 a.m. talk on a Thursday, I'm amazed you're all here. Thank you, everybody, for getting here. This could be your kind of bit of dose of caffeine for the morning before the rest of the day.
So this talk has been described by some of our team as being 5 theses in a trench coat. So we have a lot to cover. So just like Burt Reynolds and the Bandit, we have a long way to go and a short time to get there. So everyone, welcome to possibly the last talk you'll ever see. Light streams and laser beams.
All right, so speaking of late nights, the way this talk got submitted was at 3 o'clock in the morning, definitely not drinking adult beverages. I got an alarm telling me that the Black Hat submission deadline was within 2 hours.
Now, I don't want to say that we finished within the last minute. There was definitely 5 minutes left, but
when we arrived at the hotel room, we realized we had completed the entire outline except for the title, and the placeholder title we had, our individual who's responsible for keeping us in line told us it was also too boring. So this little scrill here is what happens when people in a very short amount of time, completely and utterly not inebriated, try to come up with a talk title to submit to
satisfy a deadline, yes.
All right, so to introduce you to us, Patch and myself, before we really get started, Larry and I have known each other for quite some time. And we've always joked that if we ever got to do a research project that we could actually publish online, we would call the project or the team that was responsible for doing the research project, Project Lorem.
And the reason for this is that whenever we're writing a report or a PowerPoint or a white page, Sam always puts Lorem wherever she needs to have data that would go on the first, to be finished. And now our finished project has the word Lorem everywhere on every page, like hundreds of times, and there's nothing we can do to fix it.
So much like it triggering my OCD every single time, we had to then use ChatGPT to figure out what the heck Lorem could stand for in relation to our talk, and we came up with laser oscillation for retrieving electronic memory. All right, so silliness aside, who am I? My name's Sam Beaumont. I also go by Panther. As I found out recently, my Panther tag is the same as my gamer tag. So for those of you who have just found out who I am, hello, I am Panther. I'm perpetually tired, and I'm known from amongst friends as the woman who never sleeps.
I've known her for over 8 years. I can verify that she's never slept once.
But one of the defining factors about me is that I am absolutely terrible with nouns. It does not matter if you are my best friend or if it's the name of a common household item. If it is a noun, I will forget. So if you introduce yourself to me, please continually talk about yourself in third person, because if you don't, I will probably be spending the next 20 minutes trying to figure out who you are whilst going through your entire life history and everything I know about you.
Can confirm she still calls me Larry. So I go by Patch. My real name is Larry Trowell. I am the worst person in the world for acronyms. I'm dyslexic, so I just cannot keep them in my head. I also have the weirdest navigation system. I just sort of like follow people, end up where I'm supposed to be. It works. I don't question it. It just works.
Yeah, we call it the Hand of God navigation system, which is just follow Larry and he somehow gets there. And you'll notice during the talk, we will start using terms like imaging and injection, because I will say the acronym and Larry will say the word, because otherwise we'll mix it up and then I will end up punching him on stage. And of course, it would not be complete without us introducing 3 more individuals who are integral to our ability to get on stage today, starting with Chaz Becht.
Chaz is a circuitry wizard. He is instrumental in actually building part of the hardware we'll see tonight.
Oh, yes. You might notice our emphasis on the letter S in his name. That is because when I met Chaz, autocorrect absolutely hates him and completely is convinced he doesn't exist. So he has now got a lot of aliases
that he had no choice in the matter with, but it's okay because he never sees them.
And next, and not least, we have Casey Rep, who is here today. He is also known as Fake Sam. Our silent third party, and our third musketeer, myself, Patch, and Casey all met each other on exactly the same day.
And people confused them and actually called Casey Sam and Sam Casey.
That's right. And last but not least, Curtis Shelton, because up until about 48 hours ago, I have been calling him Sheldon because I thought that was his name. And for 2+ years, he has not corrected me because he thought it was a really long-standing joke between us.
It was just on you.
Yes. So he was instrumental to our work and helping us make sure that we didn't look like idiots on the stage when we're talking about our models.
Well, he did what he could.
The 5 of us make Project LREM, and we're each part of a team for hardware and integrated systems and artificial intelligence and machine learning. And together, we are part of NetSpy, the proactive security solution company, where we are your allies in your battle for trust, in your end-to-end security solution needs, from mainframe testing to AI to hardware to application security. If you need ASM, BAS, or security solutions, we are your team to go to. And of course, before we go on, a very special thanks to 2 more individuals, John McMaster and Dr. Matt Lindley. Without their help in helping us in a time of need and emergency, we wouldn't be able to demonstrate half of the work we are doing right now, thanks to acids not arriving on time and supply chain being very difficult. OK, so you guys came here for us to talk about lasers.
All right, so everyone put your goggles on because, you know, lasers aren't safe.
Yeah.
Wait, no one bought goggles? Well, that's unfortunate.
So I think maybe, Larry, we want to talk about some safety disclaimers and some slides about, you know, why we don't have enough insurance to lase you all today. All right, so you guys have about 30 seconds to read this slide. It is an OSHA documentation about the laser safety regulations in the United States.
And don't worry, everything in the slide is legally binding.
But OK, for those of you who are at the back who can't see the little text, there are 4 specific things that you really need to keep an eye on. The first thing is you can be blinded when you're working with lasers or worse.
And invisible light is still light. It can burn you.
You must wear protection.
And remember, you only have 2 chances to protect your eyes.
If you're lucky. And of course, we cannot demonstrate to you on stage why lasers are so dangerous to the optical eye. So instead, we opted to show you how dangerous they are to things like camera phones and sensors.
And so just to summarize, if you don't protect your eyes, what you see happening to the images on the left will happen, and you'll be just as blind as Velma.
Yes. Lasers can completely blind sensors on your phones. So, you know, it's the same thing on phones as well as your eyes. All right. So, hands up in the crowd. Who knew that laser was actually an acronym?
Congratulations. No one likes a bragger.
All right. So talking about lasers and all of their types and how they exactly work is completely out of the scope of this talk. But we did want to kind of introduce it as laser, as the acronym, means light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. Yes, I had to read my own slide.
Which basically means if you pump enough photons into a laser medium, it'll come out in a single line, all like polarized.
All right. And why would you use lasers in things like chip hacking or semiconductor testing? Well, first, light is pretty easy to source.
Second, transistors are actually very poor photodiodes.
It's completely contactless.
And it's very hard to damage a chip with a laser unless you do something very wrong.
And it is typically considered a semi-invasive technique when you are preparing a target to receive a lase. So what do we mean by semi-invasive? Right. There are 2 methods you can prepare a target to receive a lase. And it still function in its original form, or on at least the original hardware.
Or at least nearly the original form.
I'm just hitting the mic over here. All right, so my favorite method is chemical decapsulation, where you use some sort of acid, like nitric or sulfuric, not the fun kind, sadly, and you chemically remove the epoxy layering on a chip, typically the top side, so you expose the die to receive something from the outside elements.
The other method, which I consider much more fun, is corrated destruction. This is sandblasting. This is extreme heat, and this is using an industrial belt sander to remove the back of the chip. Now, if you look at this image, we love this because this was a not so successful attempt. This was a semi-invasive that turned invasive because you can see the metal just flying. But normally it works perfectly.
we were definitely wearing personal protection equipment for anybody that does insurance. Absolutely, please. Yep, there's just an invisible glove in there. All right. So once we've prepped a target, now we're going to cover the most common reason of why you use a laser against a chip, and that is laser fault injection. So what is LFI? How would we use it? Why would we use it? And how does it work?
So when you're trying to do a fault injection, you're basically trying to skip instructions on a chip in a process to make it do something it's not supposed to do. Now, when you do it with lasers, obviously you shoot it with a laser. And there's three ways you can do that. You can remove the actual top of the chip, and that's called front side, where you actually try to go through it. You can use any color laser with this. Back side, you need something that can shine through the silicon, so you just remove the back of the chip, which can have a bit of extra silicon that doesn't matter if it gets removed. Or you can do lateral, which means you have to cut off the side of the chip and shoot the laser through the middle of it.
Laser fault injection is super useful when you're trying to do things like security bypassing on certain semiconductors. So it is really commonly used with people who are very interested in getting a processor to skip a very specific feature. All right. So we're going to ask a lot of questions. Is there anyone in the audience here today, do you own or have a laser fault injection rig in your house, lab, or office?
And if you do, does anyone want to admit how much it costs, roughly?
So actually, some people actually raised their hands there at the beginning and then lowered it smartly. Because if you kept it raised, I would have said drinks were on you. Because a lowball cost estimate of a new laser fault injection rig can start at $150,000. Yeah, yes. $150,000, 200,000 euros, or 180,000 Great British pounds.
And if you're careful, you might be able to piecemeal one together from used parts, but you don't really know the condition they're in. It could be working perfectly, it could be completely defunct, and you don't know what you're getting. But you can spend about $5,000, $2,000 to $20,000 and get something that may or may not work.
So when you're doing this kind of purchasing and you're doing this kind of testing, when you're faced with six-figure prices or even, like, at best, five-figure prices, your return on investment for what you're actually trying to achieve is pretty questionable depending on who you are. I also absolutely hate doing expense reports, and my finance team can confirm this. So we identified that there was a bit of a gap for anybody who wanted to do laser fault injection at not a six-figure budget. Ode, operation expense report cost reduction. Or we intended to find out, is there a way of lowering the cost of laser fault injection and bringing the tool to our home? So let's break it down. The essentials of a laser fault injection rig have three main elements. You have an imaging system.
So you can see what you're shooting.
You have a positioning system.
So you can aim at what you're shooting.
And you have a laser.
Because lasers are cool.
So let's start with an imaging system. Typically, these are microscopes. They are used to target the laser and or identification of the target that you're working at.
And if you go through some of the research projects and theses where people have made their own, typically they cost about $4,000 to get used.
All right, so what about the positioning systems? Typically, these are tables or units that are highly specialized or purpose-built with units with steppers and dials. They're used for nano positioning of the target and or the laser.
These are high-precision actual units, so even if you get them used, they're still going to be pretty expensive. Around $3,000 is the cheapest one I found used.
So for those of you not doing the maths, in combination for an imaging system and a positioning system, we're at about, on a refurb price of approximately $7,000 for just the imaging and the positioning system. We're not even at the laser yet. And in reality, all we really need is something that's capable of nano positioning of a target or a laser, and something that allows us to focus and view the laser or the laser source.
And that what brings us to the OpenFlexure project. This is a citizen science project that allows open source microscopy to the masses, and it covers both of our main goals. It has a micro-positioning system, and it has an optical focus length.
And the best part about the OpenFlexure is that it is completely 3D printable. With the Amazon purchasable parts that are found easily online, sometimes it's already in your house, in your garage. Altogether, the parts and accessories included, it costs only approximately about $280, which is a savings of $6.5 to $6.7 thousand And we're already 2 of 3 systems going into the talk. So that's a lot of money that I just saved, or we just saved, sorry.
Yep.
And that just leaves the laser.
Which is obviously the coolest part.
So traditionally, laser fault injection stations work by firing a highly powerful laser in a very short amount of time. So for example, a YAG laser can provide tens of millijoules in about under 10 seconds, and 10 nanoseconds, sorry. And it does depend on the type of target that you're working with and the type of unit that you're working with, but these are pretty good ranges to look at. And some of these systems are traditionally cost over $30,000, and that is just for the laser and nothing else. So when we were doing this project, we were like, okay, what is it about the laser that is actually making this thing expensive? So we asked ourselves 3 questions. How much energy is actually required to cause a fault injection, or also known as a glitch? Do we really need that much power in a short amount of time? And how much time can we get away with when performing laser fault injection on a budget?
So it turns out you don't really need that much energy. Most traditional systems measure how much power they put out in millijoules, but you only actually need nanojoules, which is a difference of about 1 to 10 to the 6th power.
And you may be wondering how that's possible. And enter the wonders of the world of physics, the photoelectric effect.
So like I said earlier, every transistor is a photodiode. It's a very poor photodiode, but a photodiode nonetheless. What that means is when light hits a photodiode, it turns into electricity. And every time a photon hits that metal piece inside the silicon, it adds a charge. And with enough charge, it'll change the state of the transistor. So the trick is, it doesn't have to happen all at once. If you can stop the clock or slow down the clock enough to actually give yourself time to actually power the transistor through the photooptic effect, you can accomplish the bit exchange. So you can do this with a small powered laser, say 2.5 watts over 25 nanoseconds, and it saves the same state as if you used 20 megajoules over 0.4 nanoseconds. And a 2.5 watt laser is much easier to source, but we thought we could do a little better.
And so we found on Amazon, winner, winner, chicken dinner, a diode that actually suits our purposes. What just happened? All right, it was a laser. Sorry, guys. That's what you get.
We supposed to have the goggles on first, guys.
All right, so before we start talking about a laser, we do want to give a little bit of a note about the variances of lasers, and specifically the green kind.
So the laser we picked is a traditional green laser. And by that, I want to make sure that everyone knows that all diodes are not the same. But typically, if you're looking at a green laser diode, they're using a process called frequency doubling. What that means is they take a higher powered IR laser, about 1064 nanometer, and we double it, the frequency, so it becomes a 532 nanometer. The problem is this process is very inefficient. You get about 5% of the power out in green. So whatever you're seeing in the green spectrum, it's actually about 10 times higher in the IR spectrum.
Which actually works out great for us, because these cheaply made green laser pointers, we need something in the 1064 nanometer range, and that happens to exactly correlate with the wasted energy of this laser pointer in its IR spectrum when it is green lasing.
So if you're wondering why we actually targeted 1064, it's because at around that wavelength/frequency, silicon is transparent, and you can see through it, which means we can shoot a laser through it.
And that does make glitching easier. So traditionally speaking, most LFI stations, 1064 is considered the default or the most commonly used wavelength, but that is not strictly necessary and is not always needed. But for this case, we use 1064. All right, so we've got an open flexure microscope that handles our positioning and our microscope needs. And we have a green laser pointer that we bought off Amazon. Putting it together is the RayV-Lite. It is the first generation affordable laser fault injection tool that can be made in your own home using affordable household components that you can buy on Amazon. And you can also, because I won the argument, you can throw it into a suitcase.
And I have it multiple occasions. So how does this work? So first off, we have an FPGA. That FPGA is used to slow the clock down to make sure that the actual signal has enough time to propagate into the actual chip. Then you need a lid so you can actually see what you're aiming at, because the microscope needs actual light to be able to see the target. You need the laser, obviously, because you're trying to fire a laser at something, you have to have a laser. And then you need the objective to be able to determine how much magnification you use to be able to see what you're going for.
And because everybody likes pretty pictures, the next deck is to show you the different variations of RayV throughout its birthing process. So starting with its newborn system, when it's freshly printed, is on the left as naked, and then we assemble it is on the right. When we go to load the target onto the RayV, you can see it is mounted on the top of the positioning system. And if we look underneath the positioning system, you can actually see the IC exposed, ready to receive a laser via the objective. And because we all love you, and Larry absolutely loves this GIF,
It's beautiful.
we replaced the green laser pointer for this with a blue laser pointer to show what happens when it lasers. And you can see that the RayV lasers from the underside, so everything's a contained unit, and it makes for a really pretty photo. But we did change it from green to blue because we actually like our eyes.
And our phones.
And
protect those cameras.
As covered in the disclaimer slide that you definitely read for 30 seconds. And you may be wondering, how is all of this possible with a 3D printed system? Well, in combination with a couple of stepper motors, which are fairly inexpensive, the beauty of PLA or plastic is that it bends. So when you combine that with motorized motors and you combine that with the flexibleness of plastic, you get a 50 nanometer precision micro positioning system that allows you to target efficiently via RayV. So just to do a quick component breakdown, because we may or may not be behind on time, these are the components of RayV.
So this is the stage which you use to actually move the target. And this is the objective, which actually controls what magnification we're using. These are stepper motors, which actually control the XY axis.
You can look down there as well. Yeah.
Yeah, OK, fine. This is a beam splitter, which allows us to actually shoot the laser and see what we're aiming at. And then we have the laser diode, for obvious reasons. And then we have the motor controller, which is actually what controls RayV. We have a little targeting board, so we can actually trigger the laser manually if we need to calibrate something. We, of course, have the IR LED, which allows us to see the target and focus on it. And we have the FPGA, which slows down the clock and processes the trigger.
So we do all of this, and we've shown you a lot of photos, but does it work? So to demonstrate this, we actually had to build a piece of code that lived on our FPGA board that could perform a couple of maths on the target IC to determine if, at a specific point in time, a glitch had occurred.
And we would have done a live demo, but as we pointed out, no one bought goggles.
All right. So the demonstration that you see here is our lab setup.
Yeah, and as you can see, the yellow light, when it blinks twice, is to detect the glitch has actually occurred.
When it blinks twice, a glitch has occurred. And if you keep actually watching this, the green lasing, or the green kind of flash, if you're not colorblind to the color green, is actually the laser firing. And the top screen at the top is the open flexure imaging solution that allows us to actually see and trigger and control the entire lasing. So that is the totally non-blinding demo of our LFI rig working, we promise. So full disclosure, when we first submitted this talk, we only intended to talk about affordable laser fault injection tooling. But also what happens when you put a bunch of hackers in a position of definitely mistakes were made. We got a little ambitious, and we were like, why stop there?
So what if you could do more with this device than just actually do laser glitching? What if you could read the actual chip, see what it's doing, see how it's put together? And what if you could dynamically read the memory out of SRAM and tell what the program inside the chip is actually doing?
So really what we were asking ourselves is we started this journey because we wanted to make laser fault injection tooling affordable. But what if we could take that further to other things? So let's start with something completely different. Infrared in situ inspection of silicon, also known as IRIS.
So 2023, Bunny put out this paper that actually showed that with nothing but a 1050 nanometer LED, you could see through the silicon and actually observe the process beneath it. We borrowed this process and actually used it to actually our targeting system.
So, of course, this means that you need a camera to be able to actually receive that wavelength. And coincidentally, the camera that the RayV uses for laser fault injection is rated for 800 nanometers. But when we did our testing, it could actually receive up to 1,200 nanometers, proving that data sheets lie.
Yes.
So this enabled us to leverage both Bunny's research and ours, and together make a very useful way of doing static imaging via the micropositioning of our RayV, as well as allow us to visually target something, or if you didn't want to do laser fault injection automated-wise. So what does this actually look like? If you do RayV plus Iris, you can see a 1050 nanometer LED mounted perpendicular to the target. And on the visible light camera, the IC looks totally normal. But when we activate our invisible light camera, we can actually see elements of the IC with this system. So again, Bunny, you're amazing, an absolute genius. We love you. No. And using the zooming system of RayV and the OpenFlexure kind of controls, we can actually continue down and use Iris to continually see parts of the circuitry, which actually became very useful for us when we wanted to target certain elements of a chip. And I do promise you that this slide was much higher resolution, but turns out it's possible to top out the HD requirements of PowerPoint. So if you were interested in the high resolution video, we do have it, but this is the low resolution GIF of us spanning over with the infrared light and us catching and showing that we can display elements of the chip. But there's more to this. So of course, when we were doing this and we were combining these systems, we actually had to figure out, does this actually work in real life? Like, could we figure out how to use this usefully? So on our desk, we had an Arduino Nano that we originally used for decapping some Atmegas. And on the back of it was an unused FT232R IC.
And for those of you who are good at those little hidden object games inside of the newspapers where you have to find the difference in two images, you may be able to spot some differences in these two images.
So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the FT232R, the image to the right is a die shot of an FTDI variant of what I would expect to receive if I ordered an FT232R of this kind. When we were using RayV with Iris, we were imaging this chip and noticed that what we were receiving when imaging it statically was not what we expected. So not only could we use RayV for laser fault injection, we also have been able to use RayV to verify that we're actually receiving the components that we expect supply chain-wise, which has historically become a much bigger issue as a result of COVID. All right, so that's it with static imaging. What about dynamic imaging? And by dynamic imaging, I mean, what if we wanted to pull out memory from a live system in real time? Could we do something with RayV? Or at least could we do something in an affordable manner?
So laser-like imaging is a static side channel analysis attack that lets you be able to see which transistors are active inside of the actual system.
Because remember, transistors are memory.
But they're not mapped one-to-one. They are arranged in a cluster of gates, and those clusters of gates make up various independent memory components. So in order to read the chip, you need to fingerprint it to see exactly how your chip is actually arranging those data points.
So what does that mean in English? All right, so the images that you see are the kind of like the gate state cluster arrangements that would represent a 0 or a 1 in a semiconductor of a target. Oop, click the wrong button. All right.
Sometimes we go backwards.
If we do an LLSI image that we'll cover a little bit later, the types of images that you'll be receiving when you're scanning dynamic memory on an IC is like you see in the line. If we were to abstract that, this is what the active gates would look like in clusters. So if we were to do a one-to-one mapping of what cluster 0 is and what cluster 1 is, we can directly map 0s and 1s to what we image. And that is how easy it is. Hyper-simplified.
Or some version of the word easy.
All right, so how does this do this? So LLSI has 3 very important components that you kind of have to recognize to get it all working. Starting with changes in voltage, change the absorption and reflection rate of silicon.
There's a debugging technique you use when you're actually doing silicon work that is called electro-optic frequency mapping, or as some of our team has started calling it, EEPROM.
Yep.
So when this happens, you target a transistor, and as it goes through the process of the memory passes, it will change state, and that change of state changes how much light is reserved. So it gets dimmer or brighter depending on if the transistor is active.
But because we're trying to image dynamic data, we don't actually want that data or the gate states to change when we're imaging, because the gate states represent the memory we're trying to actually read.
So if we're trying to get the entire firmware out of an IC, you need to have the memory paused. But fortunately, there's a trick. It was determined a few years ago that if you just modulate the voltage just slightly, about 1.1 millivolt, you can actually cause the same sort of change in the state, and you can read that in a diode that's attached to the laser.
So if you fire a laser at a semiconductor and you use a voltage ripple through the target, you can cause a modulated signal that can be read, and therefore, plus or minus a couple of things, create an LLSI image so that you can read data. And that is the next step, last step of our project of overachievement, because telling us no is the easiest way to tell us, all right, OK, we'll get it done. So just like LFI, LLSI has major essentials that need to be there to make it work. And there are 6 specific categories. The first is you need to be able to to modulate the target chip.
And then you need a laser that you can actually shoot at the transistor and get a reflection back.
You need a laser sensor to receive your laser.
You have to have it so it's smooth panning so you can actually tell where you're aiming at and read what the data was. And
also because you need to be able to map memory, and memory can be over a course of space.
You need precise vision. You need to be able to isolate signal from noise.
And finally, you need human readability, which means whatever we receive needs to be able to be read by a person, because otherwise it's completely useless. All right, so start with which laser. So the LFI injection rig that we originally built used 1064 nanometers. And the graph that you see here is the reflectivity of silicon in parts per million as it relates to the wavelength of light that hits it. So as you can see here, 1064 nanometers of a laser hitting silicon has a very low reflectivity rate. That's not ideal, especially when we start working with incredibly small targets, because the noise floor is very large. So we went and figured out, all right, why don't we use something with a little bit higher reflectivity? And so we chose 1300 nanometers. And some of you may be wondering, well, there are other wavelengths of light. Why did you specifically choose 1300 nanometers? That is because 1300 nanometer lasers are actually used in communications, which means they're incredibly high in supply, and they are incredibly cheap. Not only that, the lasers come with their own photodiode, which we will cover in a second. So for $6, your United States dollars, we can get a 1300 nanometer laser with a higher reflectivity rate than our LFI rig. And it comes with its own photodiode, also known as a sensor in this case. And that means we have 2 birds with 1 stone with $6.
So the diode inside the laser is meant to actually regulate the power to make sure that the laser is consistent for its communication needs. However, there's a trick where you can actually read the return laser image and get how much the difference is and be able to tell if there's actually an increase or a decrease in how much light irradiates back at the sensor.
Because Larry hates saying the title, I'm here to say that's called self-mixing interferometry. And I got that right. I got that right first time. So putting it all together. Putting it all together. To make this kind of LLSI work, you need to be able to pause the instructions and memory on the target so that you can image the transistors in their state.
And then you'd be able to send a modulated signal over the power lines, something that you can actually read the difference in the silicon when the laser hits it.
We need to be able to activate a laser beam and scan it across the memory space.
And then you need to be able to store all that data as you read and be able to determine where the bits are from the beam's reflection. OK, so if we put it all together, does it actually work? The answer is yes. So surprisingly to us, if you use hyper-affordable components, it is fully possible to fire a beam at a reflective target that is at the moment representing silicon. And what the arrow is very poorly pointing to is the signal that it is receiving back as a result of the reflection of the target, therefore proving that it is completely plausible to use affordable components to do LLSI imaging, which is fantastic. All right, so we have covered, how do we get signal retrieval from a laser by itself? We also now need to be able to understand what the hell that signal means when we go through processing.
And the irony of using a computer to make it more understandable to humans is not lost on me. But I'm very well known as someone who does not like the term artificial intelligence, because I think it is a hyper overused term. So I would like us to shoot that with a laser beam and really call this what this is, which is machine learning using statistical analysis and convolutional neural networks.
So don't believe the penguin. We did not use ChatGPT to actually read the data for us.
For the amount of stress that this project cost us, I totally would have used ChatGPT at this point if I could have. All right, so we've got low on time, so we're going to go through this really quickly.
So basically, the short version of this is that every version of RAM is unique, and you need to fingerprint it to be able to tell what data is where.
And that's why you need a model to do it, because it's much easier, much more efficient, and faster. Quick side note, Black Hat has deadlines, and building these things and lowering the signal noise floor and then scanning an image in its parts per million is incredibly slow. So what we ended up doing to train this model for this talk was using published data sets where the data sets represented exactly the type of LLSI image that we expect to receive as a result of doing this work with the RayV.
Right.
So a little bit about the data set before we go on.
So the data set is a series of images of an SRAM from an MSP430 that have 512 bits of data on each image. It's arranged in sets of 0 and randomized data sets. You can actually use the training based on these to be able to build a model that can show you how to read the data.
So the data sets are an LLSI capture of an MSP430 SRAM block.
And for those of you with superhuman vision, you can actually look at the image over here, and you might be able to see a pattern or brighter dots or whatever, but it's kind of hard to see.
Because the dots here represent the modulated signal that we talked about earlier that the LLSI is looking for when we're reading data. So to give this a little bit more context, these are the dots we're talking about. And when we zoom in, this is what it would look like.
Which is still kind of hard to see.
Exactly. So first step is we need to be able to make this way more readable and filter out the noise from the data.
So the way we do this is we take another LSI image that we captured and subtract it from the original. And we put the absolute difference in one color channel, and we leave the similarities in the different channel. And what you end up with is a very distinct image that you can actually somewhat see the pattern on.
OK, so perfect. Once we do that, next we need to be able to help the model identify where those 512 user-programmed bits are stored. So to do this, we divide it in a search grid to reduce the chance of bit collisions.
So data collisions are where you have objects that you're trying to train your data set on that change at the same rate, and that cause the data to be confusing to the AI model. And so it starts trying to use different bits that it shouldn't, and it makes it very hard to train. And sometimes you never get any training whatsoever because it doesn't know where to look.
All right, so each segment has a number of bits. We need to be able to know which segment that we're looking for. So this is how we use the segments to search for those bits. All right, we're going to skip over the slide because we're low on time, because I'm going to cover it in the next one. But basically, the way that we use this segments, if time is not an issue, is if we take one 512-bit block and program it all with ones, and we take another 512-bit block and program it all with zeros, with the exception of one, that one bit that is different represents to the model the bit that we're looking for in memory. So if we do an absolute diff of those two segments that may or may not represent the segment that is changed, it will cause an observable difference, which in itself represents the location of a binary 1 or a binary of 0. If you repeat this 512 times, you'll be able to find all 512 bit locations on a model, or if you're really, really smart, you can use maths to make this way more efficient. All right, so to demonstrate this, because that was a bit of a lot to throw at you, we have like 1 minute, we'll do a bit of a walkthrough. Right, so on the first LLSI image, we take this segment. And then on the second LLSI image, we take the same segment. So when it's extrapolated, we're looking at two different segments of the same chip memory, but programmed two different ways. If we do an absolute diff and it causes an observable change, that observable change represents the location of a 1 or a 0 for LLSI, which is fantastic.
And so now we know where the data is. We just don't know what it is. So now we can employ supervised learning to be able to tell what the data is, because we know where it is, and we know what it is in reality, so we can train the computer to read it for us.
All right, so success. In time, the model is able to correlate what is the gate representation of a 1 and what is the gate representation of a 0. So if any of you were paying attention earlier, previously I showed you this image of a gate representation of a 0, 1 for that specific memory block of what we were talking about. In this case, we actually tailored and mapped using our model a new representation of 0 or 1 because our target has changed, and this is what it essentially would look like. So, in order to test this model, we had two major data sets. We had one just used for training, and then we had another one that was only used when we wanted to test the model to see if the training worked.
So this isn't a GIF of the actual data being used on the test data set. It has not been trained on this data. It's completely isolated, as we just said. And we are able to demonstrate that we can read the first byte of the data from the actual 512 bits that are in the system. And we had a rather high success rate. But again, this is on the test data, so it's actually fine.
All right, and that is us finished talking about the generation 1 of RayV. So to do a quick recap of RayV and its use cases, we proved that building an LFI for under $500 was possible. I believe our current metric is $320, if I'm not mistaken. We proved that building an LLSI using affordable materials is completely plausible. And we proved that a CNN can be used to extract data from a live system. People will be able to use a RayV to learn chip layouts through imaging. They can introduce faults in their own home. And the thing is portable, movable, and affordable for entry-level LFI. If you want to start looking at laser fault injection, this is actually something that you can do, and it really doesn't cost you a lot of money, if you're able to print it at least. Of course, we're out of time, so we would not be here without so many giants to stand with. Thank you again. There are 3 standout papers that we specifically want to call out.
One is OpenFlexure because making this positioning possible. One is Bunny for doing the IR system. And the last one is a PhD named Martin S. Kelly, who actually first did the affordable laser models that we actually based everything off originally.
All right, so things that surprised us. Laser is an acronym. Hoarding finally paid off. I can do this from my home. Not all data sheets are real, and one of us didn't kill each other as a result of doing this project. But what was super cool, and part of the reason why we're kind of rushing through this, is how powerful open source tooling is. So about 24 hours ago, Larry and I got contacted by another set of researchers who had also been exploring the avenues of affordable laser fault injection. And they shared with us their rig. And as a result of that collaboration and as a result of open sourcing, we have agreed that we will be releasing at the same time our tools to open source at exactly 12 o'clock today, which was 2 minutes ago.
And the person responsible for it is sitting in the front row right here where the laser pointer is.
Yeah. All right. We are out of time, so things that went horribly wrong, graphs that don't make any sense, the cost of
things that have failed.
Just because it costs us less than $500 to make does not mean it costs us less than $500 to research. And next time you see us, we'd like to increase the control and precision of the laser.
We'd like to lower the noise floor.
We'd like to combine the units to one housing so we don't constantly have to swap things out.
We want to make it cheaper if possible.
Because we're crazy. And of course, we'd also like to improve the 3D print of OpenFlexure to actually start to specialize it towards our use case for laser fault injection and LLSI. So key takeaways. Lasers are fun.
But wear protection.
Money is absolutely no obstacle, as proven by our open sourcing and others reaching out to us.
So we don't have any.
And open source is king. So the link that you see here is where we will be uploading all of our materials. So if you guys wanted to start printing this and exploring laser fault injection yourself, this is where it's going to be housed, and this is where Project Lorem is going to be doing it. If it's not there, Casey is on the stage, and you can glare at him. So thank you again
Thank you, Curtis.
for attending our talk.